1,789,000. That is the number of U.S. soldiers who fought during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. Some 21 countries provided military and medical support, but the U.S. provided most of the manpower to support South Korea. The U.S. Navy, in particular, achieved great feats. Today, we go in depth about the unforgotten war and the peace process of the Korean Peninsula. For that, Ned Forney, a writer and the grandson of a U.S. war veteran, Colonel Edward Forney, who fought during the Korean War, now joins me in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And, of course, much gratitude to your grandfather, Colonel Edward Forney, for his courage and the contributions he has made for peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you.
Now, could you first start us off by telling us more about who Colonel Forney was and how he first got engaged in the Korean War?
Sure. Interestingly, on June 25th, 1950, when the Korean War breaks out, Colonel Forney is already not here, but he's in Japan. Douglas MacArthur, who is then in Japan with the U.S. Army, he asked the United States Marine Corps to send an amphibious expert that would work with the Army soldiers, teach them how to do amphibious landings. And the Marine Corps sent to MacArthur Colonel Forney. Colonel Forney at that time was the senior kind of Marine Corps amphibious expert in the Marine Corps. And he had gone to the Naval Academy, graduated in 1932. He had fought in World War II in the Pacific against the Japanese. So by 1950, he was in Japan. And when the war actually breaks out, when he gets news that the fighting has started, he is on the command ship, the USS Mount McKinley, and that's Admiral James Doyle's command ship. So they're there together. They'd worked together during World War II, and there they are, and they hear the news, and they're actually watching an Army landing take place, a practice operation. So after that, he joins the 10th Corps, which is a U.S. Army Corps, huge Army organization, and he works for General Almond, who is the commanding general of 10th Corps. So Colonel Forney becomes the Deputy Chief of Staff for the 10th Corps, and then he has a role in the Incheon landing, the Wonsan landing, and then, of course, the Hungnam evacuation in December 1950.
So he was in Japan before the Korean War broke out.
That's right. Yeah, he was there.
Any special memories about your grandfather that you want to share with us?
Sure. So Colonel Forney died at the age of 55 from cancer. So he was very young. I was 2 years old. So I don't have memories of my grandfather. I went into the Marine Corps. I was in for 5 years. And during that time, I heard people talk about him. I read books that mentioned him. And I was a history teacher after I got out of the Marines, so I did a lot of research. But it wasn't until 1998, 21 years ago this summer, that I came to Korea for the first time. So I was a history teacher in the United States. I applied for a teaching fellowship. I came to Korea, and one of the first people I met in the lobby of the President's Hotel in downtown Seoul here was a man by the name of Dr. Hyun Bong-hak. And I'd never met Dr. Hyun. I didn't know who he was. But he introduced himself and said, "I've been looking for the Forney family for years. I was friends with your grandfather during the Korean War." And so we spent 2 hours together in the lobby there, and he told me...
And that was just a coincidence?
That was... Actually, he knew I was coming because I'd written an essay. Right, and saying why I wanted to be here in Korea. And a friend had given the essay to him and said, "Here's the guy you've been looking for." So I show up in Korea, and that's where this friendship started between Dr. Hyun and myself. Dr. Hyun passed away in 2007. But I learned more from my grandfather, from Dr. Hyun, than anyone else.
Your grandfather, Colonel Edward Forney, he survived the World War II and the Korean War, but so sorry to hear that he had to succumb to cancer. I didn't know about that.
Right. We think after World War II, he was sent to Nagasaki just weeks after the atomic bomb was dropped. And we were an occupation force at that point. And so he was there for about 7 months. And so we suspect that he was exposed to radiation, and that's probably why he died at such a young age of cancer.
Wow. Yeah. This is a very vivid explanation of history. Now, we hear that you've mentioned briefly about Hungnam evacuation, but we hear that Colonel Forney played a leading role in the Hungnam evacuation operation, which took place in December 1950, if I'm right. That's about right. 6 months after the Korean War broke out. The operation is quite well known to South Koreans as well, and I don't know if you know, but even President Moonjaein's parents are known to have benefited from that operation.
Right.
Could you explain to us in detail what kind of an operation it was?
Sure. The story of Hunam always starts with the Chosin Reservoir campaign, which correctly should be Changjin, but of course the Marines had Japanese maps, so they read it as Choshin. But we know, and when I give my lectures, I always say Changjin. So they're at Changjin. They're surrounded by the Marines and U.S. soldiers, ROK Katyusha, and actually some British Royal Commandos. They're surrounded, about 30,000 of them are surrounded by 120,000 Chinese, because the Chinese had told us repeatedly, don't get too close to the Yalu River, don't come too close to Manchuria. Mao Zedong had said over and over again, please don't do that. And we did. And MacArthur did not listen to his intelligence. So long story short, we're trapped up at Chosin. It's freezing cold, minus 30 temperatures, snow, terrible, rugged mountains. So we're there, and the Chinese have surrounded us, ready to annihilate. The entire majority of those men were from the 1st Marine Division. And so they do break out. They do not get annihilated, even though the casualties are terrible. Not only from Chinese combat, but also from the cold. So it was so cold that if you were injured or if you stopped moving, you froze. So they do make their way out about 70 miles down to the coast, to the East Sea, and the port there is Hunam. And at that port are Navy ships. And the Navy ships are waiting for all the military folks to get on the ships. And General Almond, the commander of 10th Corps, he looks to Colonel Forney and says, you're the senior Marine on my staff. You know about amphibious landings and amphibious withdrawals, so get everyone on the ships. So obviously he was just one man, but he was the team leader, so to speak. Admiral Doyle, who I mentioned earlier, he was there with his Navy ships. So the two men who had worked together in World War II come together to get the military personnel and all their vehicles and all their supplies and all their ammunition and fuel onto the ships. So while they're doing that, Dr. Hyun is there. And he looks around and he sees all these refugees, tens of thousands of refugees who have come from all over northeast North Korea, and they no longer want to live under communism. So they'd heard rumors. If you get to Hunam, maybe, just maybe, the Navy ships will rescue you. You can actually get on the ships and you can sail south and you'll be free of Kim Il-sung and the Chinese troops that are coming. So they go to Hunam and they wait and they wait. And Dr. Hyun is there. He was from Hamhung, which is about 10 miles from Hunam. And he's talking to all the North Korean refugees, telling them, have faith. We think we can get you on the ships. But they wait and they wait. And a small percentage does get on the ships. But it's not until the last few days that a huge influx of ships come in, thanks to Admiral Doyle. Colonel Forney figures out how to get them on the ships. And through that whole thing, Dr. Hyun is constantly advocating for the refugees. So, once again, it was a team effort. And Colonel Forney and Dr. Hyun both played their parts. Admiral Doyle played his part. And, of course, there were thousands of hardworking guys, loading the ships and getting the refugees onto the ships. So on December 24th, that's the day that the U.S. military pulls out of Hunam. The operation is over, 2 weeks long, constantly getting people on the ships, and towards the end, even refugees. When it's all said and done, 100,000 approximately refugees have been evacuated.
Wow, 100,000, that is a big number.
Right.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was an amazing feat. And it's the largest seaborne military evacuation of civilians under combat conditions in American history. And it's the largest humanitarian operation of the Korean War. And in the States, most people, unfortunately, don't know about the Hunam evacuation.
I think my eyes are starting to get watery just to hear so vividly about the story and about our painful and tragic history.
Yeah.
But it was very fortunate, I guess, to being able to save so many lives and helping the refugees to get to the destination they wish to. Just a phenomenal history there. Now, what kind of message do you think the Hungnam operation sends us today?
Right. So the operation itself, very complex, very complicated, but I think the message is very simple. And the message is that good people, not great people, not heroes, but just good people doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons, under very difficult circumstances, can really impact people's lives and impact history. And I think that relates to, you know, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a writer, whether you're a politician, a teacher, a business person. If we do the right thing at the right time, as Abraham Lincoln refers to it, our better angels, listening to our better angels, then great things can happen. And the Hungnam evacuation was a great success. And, you know, as you talked about earlier, Moonjaein's parents were on the Meredith Victory, which is the most famous ship of the Hungnam evacuation. It's the one most people have heard about. It's the one that's in the movie Ode to My Father, or Kuche Shizant. So many people know about the Meredith Victory. And Moonjaein's parents were on that ship. Moonjaein was born a few years later at Kojedo at a refugee camp. And there's an estimated now 1 million descendants of those 100,000 refugees that were rescued. And obviously, the current president of South Korea is one of them. So I think that's a perfect example of, you know, listening to your better angels.
Now, I understand you're writing a book about the Korean War. Now, as an author, is there anything in particular that you'd like to say about this unforgotten war that is technically and very sadly still ongoing?
Right. You know, one of the underlying themes of my book, which will be called, I hope, Our Better Angels, one of the underlying themes is Korean-American friendship. And I think that's something that's embodied through Colonel Forney and Dr. Hyun, and the Forney family today, and the Hyun family today, and Koreans and Americans who are friends, whether they work together or they're involved in different organizations or on the political scene even. So I think that, yes, technically the war is not over, but I think with a strong ROK-U.S. friendship, ROK-U.S. alliance, I think the war will be over, and I hope soon, and I think we'll have peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Now, speaking of which, the South Korea-U.S. military alliance has remained solid for nearly 7 decades now. How do you assess the current ROK-U.S. alliance? Do you think it has somewhat weakened during the course of years?
Right. I've been living, my wife and I have been in Korea for 4 years, and we've seen, you know, things go up and down. But I really think the ROK-U.S. military alliance is so strong that despite, you know, ups and downs and things that happen politically, I think it's very strong. And I think the perfect example is Camp Humphreys. And I go down there a few times. I've given some lectures down there. It's amazing, that, you know, how large it is. And $10 billion to pay for that base, 90% was paid for by Korea. And so I think that just shows that obviously we have this strong bond. It's not going away anytime soon. I don't think there'll be any troops leaving. We have approximately 30,000 troops there. I think the U.S. ROK alliance is strong, and I think it will stay that way for a long time.
Well, people in Korea often say that Camp Humphreys, if you go in there, it's like a little mini United States
Right.
in the base.
Oh, yeah.
Now, having a war veteran as your grandfather and as a person currently living in South Korea, I'm sure you will have a great interest in the regional development surrounding North Korea, surrounding North Korea's denuclearization, to be more specific.
Right.
How are you observing the latest developments, of course, including the historic handshake between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un?
Yeah. History in the making, for sure, right? We're living in very historic times. And I think, like almost everybody in Korea, in the United States, and in the world, wants peace on the Korean Peninsula and wants denuclearization of North Korea. And I think what we're doing, we're moving in the right direction, for sure. I think whatever happens in the future, I hope will result in some type of unification. It'll be very complicated, we know, and it will take a while. But I think with patience, with perseverance, and a lot of hard work, I think we can continue on this path. So I hope that Kim Jong-un is sincere about his intentions to denuclearize. I think that's the wild card.
All right, Mr. Forney, thank you so much for sharing your very special stories with us today. A truly meaningful and interesting time we had with you tonight.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth from all of us here at Arirang. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow.